is comprised of 5 military families who will be sharing their stories and solutions to special needs education challenges that military children are facing. The lead speaker is Michelle Norman, the 2019 Armed Forces Insurance Navy Spouse of the Year, co-founder of Parents for Free Appropriate Public Education, or FAP, and advocate for military children and their education. Michelle, the floor is yours.
Good morning, Congressman Bishop, Congresswoman McMorris-Rogers, and other distinguished guests here today. My name is Michelle Norman, and on behalf of military families here and the over 132,000 exceptional family member program families across the military services, we appreciate this opportunity to discuss special education for our children with exceptional needs. A sincere thank you to LeVar Armstrong and Joe Easton for giving us a seat at the table, and to National Infantry Museum and Soldier Center staff for providing the perfect forum today. Sorry. Here we go. Oh, technology. Gotta love technology.
When it works, it's great.
Well, I think we'll just keep going, and then hopefully our overview slide will come up. Echoing the previous panel on K through 12 education, we all want a high-quality education for our military-connected children. Our goal is to have children who can become independent and successful, productive members of society. As you know, military families have the extra challenge of moving every 2 to 3 years, disrupting the continuity of their education. Now add in a military child with special needs and it becomes exponentially more difficult. This last spring, we worked with congressional leaders to insert the following language in the NDAA 2020. The committee is concerned that many families participating in the EFMP program are not provided with the consistent educational opportunities throughout each permanent change of station move. The committee is concerned that each PCS is disruptive to the educational plans for the child, as the services provided to special needs children can vastly differ between states and school systems, and that each PCS is disproportionately more difficult for EFMP families who may need more time to make educational choices. The committee is also concerned that the Department of Defense and services lack the common performance measures and metrics to assess assignment coordination and family support. The committee tasked the Secretary of Defense with studying this issue and completing a report by February of 2020. This study was designed to fulfill the requirements of U.S. Code 1781C, which directs DoD to identify gaps in services for military families with special needs and provide recommendations for legislative action to congressional defense committees. The trend is that many public school systems have not been providing the required standards of education for exceptional military children, often minimizing their disabilities and failing to appropriately implement individualized education programs, otherwise known as IEPs, which are legally binding documents. With no enforcement authority by the Department of Education or any other effective form of accountability from any institution, the responsibility to meet the standards of the law is left at the discretion of the school leaders. In other words, schools are self-regulating. There are some great school districts that do the right thing, follow federal law, and work collaboratively with parents. Sometimes schools provide quality special education to several students, but not to others. In any case, the data we have shows that there are systemic problems with special education of military families across the U.S. Many school districts tend to wait out military families to avoid the financial burden of providing the required services and supports for our children. Making the situation worse are the glaring lack of effective resources available for families, in particular legal assistance, which is crucial when school districts are not complying with state and federal laws. We are then left to fend for ourselves. It forces us to accept a substandard education or pull our children from public school to either homeschool or enroll them in private schools. When our families experience great challenges advocating for our children, the stress can be all-consuming, with many of us in therapy and suffering physically and emotionally. When our families are stressed and exhausted, it directly affects our service member, which in turn directly affects military readiness and retention. The stories you hear today are from 4 families, but I want to emphasize this affects many, many families across the U.S. You'll hear my story, along with Shannon DeBlock, military spouse, Casey McCarley, military spouse and program manager with Military Child Education Coalition, and Grace Kim, military spouse and special education attorney. We all have powerful, raw, emotional experiences, but we also have concrete solutions. We'll end with a discussion of those solutions, as well as a Q&A session. And as we speak, look at who's on the panel. Do you notice what we have in common? Also, do you notice what service is not at the table? So before I begin, I want to point out that we all have similar stories of advocating for the minimum education required by federal law. However, in my family's case, a precedent was set by the Virginia Beach City Public School District when they chose to sue my daughter, despite us having won all legal decisions. Yes, 3 days after Christmas, and while her dad was preparing to deploy overseas for 15 months, they filed due process against my daughter, a severely disabled student who is steadily advancing in her private placement that was mandated by a hearing officer. Here is our story. We're a proud Navy family. My husband Cass is a captain with over 25 years of service, and we have 2 beautiful children. My daughter Marissa was born at 27 weeks, weighing 2 pounds 3 ounces, and soon after was enrolled in the EFMP program. Despite 21 diagnosed disabilities and the doom and gloom from doctors, she has average intelligence and is progressing with appropriate supports and services now in place. She plays on her school volleyball team and is on track to obtain a standard high school diploma. The legal battle for Marissa's education started in 2014 when we PCS'd from Fairfax County to Virginia Beach, Virginia. I want to stress that we've had many positive experiences in public schools in several states, where IEP teams collaborated with us and truly cared to support our daughter's education. Upon arriving to Virginia Beach for a 3rd tour, we immediately noticed a stark difference. In the first 30 days, goals and services were taken away from my daughter's IEP. We didn't realize the implications at first, but the school continued a pattern of minimizing our daughter's disabilities and telling us that everything was fine. Meetings became hostile, not collaborative, and worse, the school district was not following her IEP. Imagine how hard this was for Marissa. She regressed socially and academically, failing all benchmark testing, yet was placed on the honor roll and received a Student of the Month award. My gut was telling me something was not right. To make matters worse, Cass was out of state for training for 22 months, something school officials asked about often, trying to gauge when we would receive our next set of military orders and move on and no longer be a burden. Stressed and exhausted, we paid for a special education advocate. She confirmed our suspicions that the school was violating federal law and that we were being gaslighted. That is when we hired Grace, a special education attorney. We pulled our daughter and placed her in a private school for kids with learning differences, a decision that changed my daughter's life for the better. Even though she had to repeat 5th grade due to the regression in the previous year in public school. We kept working with the school officials for another year by attending a total of 16 IEP meetings, several of which my husband called into from an aircraft carrier on a combat deployment in the Persian Gulf. When presented yet again with an inappropriate IEP, We had no choice but to file for due process. We won our first due process hearing in 2016. The school district was ordered to pay for her private school. Do you think the story ended there, with Marissa happily attending the new school that was meeting her unique needs? No. The school district appealed to the federal district court. During that time, do you think the school district was following the hearing officer's mandatory orders? No. That trend has continued for several years. We win legal decisions, the school district fails to comply or delays the process. Even after we won in the Fourth Circuit Court in 2018, the federal judge's orders were not followed, and financial payments for my daughter's education stopped altogether. Then, 3 days after Christmas, the school district sued my daughter to get her back in public school. We're the only family the school district has ever sued. As a mom, it is my job to protect my children. I was devastated that night as my daughter cried in her bed. She told me she didn't want to fight anymore. She didn't want to testify again. She just wanted to be a normal student like everyone else. She knows she already has lifelong challenges, and she didn't understand why this was happening to her and our family. And I had no answers. Her anxiety was at an all-time high, which resulted in damaging behaviors like picking her skin and pulling her hair. She was traumatized, and we felt harassed. To us, this was reprisal. My husband, away again for training, had 1 week to spend at home before leaving for a 15-month overseas deployment. Instead of spending it at home with us, he spent it in a 5-day due process hearing, which almost didn't happen since the school district refused to consider a different hearing date so he could attend. We were forced to invoke the Service Member Civil Relief Act to move the hearing date. This is just one of many examples of distasteful and unethical actions we experienced. On the last day of the hearing, my daughter couldn't enter the hearing room for a long time because she was intensely anxious and stressed, but the hearing officer was patient. Marissa was eventually able to give a simple, moving testimony on how this legal battle has affected her. Most were in tears. In the end, we won again. We're now 5-0 in legal decisions. Although the school district did not appeal this latest decision, they are once again not following legal orders. Despite PBS NewsHour, Stars and Stripes, and local news stations covering our story, our legal battle has no end in sight. And it's come at a huge cost. We are alone. There's been no help available from school liaison officers, EFMP, or any other DoD program. School districts have no reason to comply with regulatory efforts by the DOE, especially if they have deep pockets of taxpayer money to fight parents. My husband's readiness has deteriorated significantly. We're exhausted, stressed, and broke after spending $220,000 in legal expenses. Most importantly, it will literally take years of therapy for my daughter to heal from this trauma that the school district created. No family should ever go through what we've gone through for an appropriate education for their child. We need you to not just listen today, but to take action and support our military families. We can and must do better. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Shannon DeBach. I'm an active duty Navy spouse. My husband, Jason, is a surface warfare officer currently in his 19th year of service. He's completed 5 deployments on 5 different ships and is headed to his 6th tour this coming November. I want to thank everyone for allowing me to share my story. It's out of my comfort zone to share such personal details, but I feel compelled by sheer anger and disbelief at how stressful my family's experience was when we PCS'd to San Diego from Annapolis, Maryland in 2017. I'm also a mom to 2 boys. My youngest son, Wesley, is 10 years old and was diagnosed with autism at 16 months old. We've encountered many challenges with my son's condition, but by far the most challenging one has been educating him. Due to the severity of his disability, he requires significant educational services. In 2017, we received orders to San Diego and decided to live within Poway Unified School District. We were hoping to get off on a good foot with transitioning Wesley, so we reached out to the district in the spring before moving there in August to coordinate his arrival. In my initial call to the district, I was met with immediate resistance. They refused to give me any information about their special education programs. I tried to explain to them we were a military family, we're moving 3,000 miles across the country, and we weren't going to arrive until the week before school started. I wanted them to be prepared to receive Wesley in his current IEP. Wesley has what is considered high-tier services in his IEP that often requires the school district to contract with outside providers and plan accordingly for his transition. They disregarded my pleas and stated that by law they did not have to give me any information unless I had a legal residence within their district, which I did not at the time. Shortly thereafter, I was told they were tired of parents shopping them and was hung up on. I remember thinking to myself that maybe I caught somebody on a bad day, maybe it was a new employee, if only that were the case. This set the tone for a really difficult 2 years, and things progressively got worse. For the course of the first year, the school district repeatedly violated federal education laws to include the IEP that we brought from our previous district was not honored. Wesley was also not placed in a comparable classroom. We were not permitted to have any input into his initial placement, and he was subsequently placed in the wrong type of classroom. We had to move him not only to a different class, but a new school as well. Between 2 different schools, he had 4 different teachers and no progress report until the 9th month of being in the district that first year. He didn't receive consistent transportation until the first week of December, despite it being listed as a service in his IEP. These are just a snapshot of federal and state education law violations. Those first few months were the most difficult for Wesley and our family. With him being in the wrong school, anxiety at an all-time high, Jason was gone on deployment, and me scrambling for any help I could find to quickly learn about California's special education laws. In addition to all of these issues, Poway Unified sought to remove all of Wesley's services and supports that had been in place for the previous 5 years. The district needed my consent to change his IEP. In other states, the districts can just change it without parental consent. There are many nuances like this in special education, making it difficult for the layman to navigate. It was hard, and there was no help to be found. We tried to work collaboratively with the district to make them understand why these services were necessary for him and to work with us, leaving the IEP in place as it had been. But it was clear they did not want to partner with us. We're reasonable people, and we were willing to give and take to work something out. They had other ideas in mind. On the very last day of school that first year, a FedEx envelope addressed to Wesley showed up on my door. With my heart racing and fingers trembling to open it, I knew that we reached a whole new level of conflict. It was a due process notification from the school district's attorney. We had to hire our own attorney, which cost us thousands of dollars. The school district had a high-power Orange County law firm that is funded using taxpayer money. Clearly no match for us. According to a recent news article in the San Diego Tribune, in the last year alone, Poway Unified has spent $1.1 million settling disputes with parents. We attempted to find an attorney even before due process was filed, but we encountered several problems. The first was none of them wanted to take the case until we were actually in litigation. And B, we were told even if we won, the district likely would come back and sue again the following year. The ultimate recommendation from 8 different local attorneys in the San Diego region was we should move out of the district. This ordeal took a tremendous toll on our family, both emotionally and financially. We decided to move and geographically split up our family. Jason requested a transfer and would complete his command tour in Norfolk, and the kids and I would move back to our old district in Annapolis, Maryland, to avoid any similar issues elsewhere. Not surprisingly, as soon as we told the district we were moving, they agreed to settle our case. In addition to seeking legal help from private attorneys, we exhausted all other resources. We reached out to 12 agencies from OSAP to the California Department of Education, the DOD, and various nonprofits. None were able to provide any substantial help and typically just gave us a phone number of another organization to call. This is a family readiness issue. We know other families in similar situations. Many give up or move. Some choose to homeschool instead of being in constant conflict with the school. We need help with special education. School districts like Poway Unified operate outside of the law. There's no accountability, no oversight, and no penalty for not educating our children. There needs to be improved oversight because right now there is very little, and they are operating with impunity. We need more resources, such as the DOD, to provide special education attorneys to help us resolve issues earlier rather than getting taken to due process. Schools receive DOD impact aid, and consideration should be given to withholding it for any school that has a substantiated complaint filed against them. Not only are they receiving funds for military-connected children, but they receive additional funds for a child with a disability. Is this money then used to sue military families? The DOD needs to have a mechanism to influence schools to support military families, which is the opposite of what is happening now. We left California this summer after 2 years of turmoil and began a new journey back in our old school district in Maryland. Jason is living apart from us now as he approaches starting his command tour, which is 4 hours away from us. We are doing well and settling in. It'll be hard, but we are committed to our kids receiving a proper education. Thank you for letting me share my story.
Congressman Bishop, Congresswoman McMorris-Rogers, and our other elected officials and senior military leaders, and our families here today. Thank you for your time and your attention as we, everyday military families, share just a snapshot of the challenges military kids with special needs and their families are struggling to navigate. I'm Casey McCarley, and I'm here on behalf of my family and many, many other Army families. Our story is not unique. My husband, command chaplain for 3rd Brigade, 1st Cav Division, while his unit is currently deployed to story I want to share today. Zeke is 14. He's an 8th grader in middle school, a gold medal champion in freestyle swimming. He loves going to the movies, reading, talks about getting his driver's license one day, and even wants to have a girlfriend. Although he has Down syndrome, he is without a doubt more like his typically developing peers than different. And yet seeking a free and appropriate public education for him within our Army lifestyle has been costly beyond what we ever imagined. During Zeke's 2nd grade year, our family made a winter PCS mid-school year, and Zeke entered a new school district with an IEP that clearly outlined him as a full inclusion, 100% general education student. The receiving school district refused to follow the IEP, stating that children with Down syndrome require too much extra help for the general classroom, and Zeke would need to be moved to a self-contained class. After my advocating and reminding them of the laws that safeguard Zeke's rights, they placed Zeke in a general education class of 25 students with no accommodations, no modifications, and then made multiple attempts to change his placement to a more restrictive setting without my consent. They refused to provide him with the services outlined in his IEP before the PCS, and he documented his failures, bolstering their wanting to move him from full inclusion. Why, you might ask? Because it's cheaper and easier for a district when student services align with resources already in place, rather than to make the kid fit the school rather than the education fit the child. when Zeke should have received individualized academic support and speech therapy in the general classroom. They provided him with no help and no specifically designed instruction. Consequently, Zeke regressed in his reading and writing skills and showed negative behaviors atypical to his personality. After 4 months of lost instruction, nearly an entire academic semester, with no academic progress, constantly struggling with the district, and gathering piles of documentation, we challenged the school and won compensatory services for Zeke. The compensatory services were intended to compensate for lost learning, but then we found those compensatory services were not delivered with integrity. We had no choice but to remove Zeke from public school at that time and place him in a private context at our own expense so he'd have opportunity for academic learning and social emotional development in an appropriate classroom. He excelled in private school for 2 years. Then my husband received orders and we PCS'd, and the above nightmare repeated for Zeke. When we sought to enroll Zeke at the new duty station public middle school, we were told by school administration, he has Down syndrome. We don't do that. Do what? We asked. Educate children according to their IEP? School leadership told our family that at this school, children with Down syndrome go into self-contained classrooms, not the general education classroom. We challenged the school for their egregious discrimination, like we'd done at the previous duty station, and quickly saw that our concerns were ignored at all levels of the district. So with no voice and no recourse, we were forced again to remove Zeke and place him in a private school at our own expense, which unfortunately was unsustainable for us financially. Homeschool became the only education option for Zeke at that time, but we refused to pretend that Zeke should fit into a pre-established program. But we had no one to help us help the district follow the law. After homeschool, Zeke returned to a private context for a year, and he's now back in public school and doing well. Our family chose to move off the military installation to a local community and consequently pay double my husband's BAH just so Zeke could access a quality public school system. Not all Army families can afford this expensive journey, especially our younger enlisted service members. Weary from the battle, our family will likely opt to be geographically separated next year. The service member, my husband, and our family being separate so that Zeke can maintain academic progress within a district that operates with fidelity. As an Army family, it's hard to endure mandatory times of separation required by my husband's job. But choosing to be apart should never be the best option we Army families face. Like other spouses on the panel today, I've chosen a career in advocacy that in many ways chose me first. Our personal lives have been shaped by the special education journey and struggle. I'm grateful to the Military Child Education Coalition for supporting me to give voice to these struggles today as an active duty mom and spouse, and also for their diligent work on behalf of exceptional children around the world. My recommendations for addressing these persistent issues that transcend military branches and duty stations are listed at the end of these slides and echoed with fellow parents. We ask you, please, give not only thoughtful consideration to the stories you hear today, but also action that creates positive change for all military-connected students with special needs.
Hello, my name is Grace Kim. My husband is Chaplain Lieutenant Colonel in the United States Air Force. He's currently a reservist. He was 13 years prior active duty as an Air Force chaplain and also as a corpsman in the United States Navy. He was Air Force Level Chaplain of the Year 2014, and he served during Desert Shield, Desert Storm, and Iraqi Freedom. He is now a Chick-fil-A operator. Joshua is deeply patriotic. He grew up in a Navy family. He's always had his heart set on a military career. But when faced with moving our I'm so emotional. When faced with moving our autistic son to a state that is known for their lack of special education services, my husband had to make the very difficult decision to separate from active duty and choose his family over a military career. My son Josiah has numerous neurological, physical, communication, and learning disabilities. When he was younger, the expert told us that he may never walk or talk. He may never be capable of learning to read or to write. We refused to accept these limitations and ensured that Josiah received every type of intervention and therapy he needed. However, when it came to Dodea and public schools, it was not what Josiah needed, but what they had available, what they were willing to provide. We were told in North Carolina that since Josiah was not as severe in his behaviors as others on the autism spectrum, and since my husband was an officer, we could clearly afford better services privately. And so the school decided not to provide my son with physical therapy or occupational therapy services. Keep in mind that due to his disabilities, Josiah could not stand up straight, jump, run, or even maintain a working posture at his desk. He could not write his name. He could not zip up a zipper or button a button. He could not tie his shoelaces. Additionally, he was erroneously identified as what is referred to under the ESSA, or the Every Student Succeeds Act, and the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, as an English language learner, what was previously known as English as a Second Language, or ESL. As you can probably tell by hearing me, I speak English pretty well. And my husband also is very fluent in his English. Josiah was born in the United States and has only spoken the English language. Despite all of this, rather than receiving his special education services, he was being pulled out for English language instruction. As we have described, fighting for our children's educational rights has been very costly. Due to all the additional services we personally paid for out of our pockets, we could not afford a lawyer. And so I went to law school and became one. Since I became a special education attorney, Josiah's services have vastly improved. He is set to graduate in 2020 with a standard diploma and has his sights set on either winning The Voice or going to college. While Josiah still struggles with zippers, buttons, and shoelaces, I mean, it's actually kind of funny. It's cute now, but he's 17 and he still can't tie his shoelace. Even though he still struggles with that, he can handwrite his name and he can type up a 5-paragraph essay. He can look you in the eye when he's talking to you. And for those who are familiar with children on the spectrum know that that is a big deal. He can also stand before a crowd of strangers and sing a moving ballad. In addition to the monetary cost of raising a child with special needs, because there always are additional costs, there have been a lot of unexpected costs. These include my husband's military career, my former career, and the cost of changing careers for both my husband and myself, and the cost of law school, because it's not cheap. These costs are emotional as well as physical, as anxiety and worry about students bullying Josiah, which happened way too often, and whether Josiah would receive a free and appropriate public education, also known as a FAPE. Those thoughts, those worries will keep us up at night. Our other children have also suffered. Now, my family is not unique in this regard. None of our families are unique in this regard. I practice special education law in the Commonwealth of Virginia. My clients include Navy families such as Marissa Norman, as well as Air Force, Army, National Guard, and Coast Guard. I do not have any Marine families as clients. Oftentimes, the school districts try to find out exactly how long these families will be their problem, and time and again, I have seen the IEP, or the Individualized Education Program, and due process timelines drawn out and extended in hopes that these families will give up or with PCS to the next duty station. They're blatantly asked, when are you guys moving on? the schools will ignore pleas for the students' needs to be met while insisting that these families complete the impact aid forms. My clients have experienced school districts' blatant refusals to adhere to the law, forcing them to quote-unquote lawyer up. These same school districts report skewed data to make themselves appear to be military family friendly and in adherence with the law. School districts such as Virginia Beach City Public Schools, who filed and lost a due process complaint against Marissa Norman while Captain Norman was preparing for a 15-month deployment. PCSing to a new duty station is especially difficult, as school districts will oftentimes not review an IEP or evaluations for a student who is not yet enrolled in their school district, regardless of whether or not they have military orders, regardless of what the law says. Typically for military students with special needs, this results in a delay in education and services, and as you have heard, these delays repeat over multiple moves and have a deep impact on the lives of military students with special needs and their families. If this is an issue for neurotypical or non-disabled military families, as we heard earlier, imagine how much more for the military family of a child with special needs. Our hope is that our children and the next generation of military children with special needs will be able to share the same hopes and dreams of a bright future that their non-disabled counterparts have. In order to move forward towards this future, military families of children with special needs need your support. We have shown that we are willing to go to extraordinary measures for our children. Attorneys in law school are costly, and unfortunately, this level of legal representation and intervention on behalf of our children is necessary. We hope that other families will be able to benefit from our stories and our struggles and receive the services, legal assistance, and support that they need. We look forward to working together to make this hope into a reality. Thank you.
So I asked earlier to look at our panel and see what we have in common. We are all officer families. We could not find one junior enlisted family who is able to afford legal assistance. There are also no Marine Corps families here. The Marine Corps has a robust EFM program with special education attorneys that assist their families and directly represent them in court. The paid legal representation compels school districts to actually follow federal and state laws. Marine Corps children with needs are consistently provided appropriate education. With the exception of the Marine Corps, DoD lacks effective special education advocacy for our military families. There is also little to no advocacy support from SLOs, EFMP, and Fleet and Family Support Centers. Although commonly referred to these resources, EFMP families often feel frustrated when no one will listen to their unique case or offer to sit in a meeting with them. These resources given only offer superficial support. Although state DOEs are responsible for regulating public schools, they lack enforcement authority and legal teeth when a school district does not comply with the law. The Military Interstate Compact typically defers to federal law, and although Office of Special Needs makes IDEA policy, they rely on the states to oversee it. Nonprofits are largely ineffective, dispersing information that a military family can simply Google nowadays. Military families need personalized support and special education attorneys who know the law and can hold school districts accountable. On the subject of money, impact aid funding is distributed to public school districts serving our military children. Separate impact aid funding is allocated for military children with IEPs. Those two pots of money make up the majority of impact aid funding to school districts. There's also a third pot of funding for severely disabled military children that schools can apply for that covers expenses such as private tuition or related services. There's no auditing of impact aid, a situation similar to privatized military housing. There's no accountability or transparency in the use of impact aid funds, since those funds typically go into a general fund in school budgets. In fact, it is ironic that impact aid funds designated to help military children with needs are being used to pay school attorneys to fight military parents who are simply advocating for the minimum level of education for their children. Special education problems for our military families are widespread and knows no boundaries. Parents' voices have been silenced by reprisal from the public schools, and their fear of how speaking up may negatively affect their career, especially our young enlisted families. And those families certainly cannot afford attorneys to fight for them. With the exception of the Marine Corps EFM program, DoD, federal, state, and nonprofits are not offering effective support for when a school district is not following the law. Throwing more impact aid money at the problem is not the solution, since there's no way to ensure the funding is actually supporting the exceptional military child. We need your help on taking up 5 urgent actions. First, we need to define the size and scope of the problem. Parents know that they'll face reprisal from the schools if they dare to speak up. This fear has stifled parents' voices and has obscured the problem. We need to, 1, support the DoD study I mentioned earlier, and 2, ensure EFM programs across all branches are surveying their families as directed in U.S. Code 1781C. Second, we need you to educate families on their rights. Military OneSource is a helpful website, but it is static. It offers no personalized advocacy for the unique challenges that parents face, especially when federal law is being broken. Families need personalized support at critical times, such as when they first enter EFMP, when PCSing to a new duty station, and when transitioning out of the service. And they need to understand the laws for each of those residences. Third, this is why we need EFMP standardization. The Marine Corps has done an excellent job of allocating funds to the EFM program and providing legal support in the form of special education attorneys positioned on both coasts of the U.S. Other services simply need to follow their lead. There's no need to reinvent the wheel. Fourth, we need Congress, DOE, and DoD to develop measures to provide better oversight and compliance of IDEA for military families. If there's enforcement of IDEA, then school districts would be inclined to comply. And fifth, we need auditing of impact aid funding to school districts. Tracking those funds will ensure that those funds actually follow the student so they can receive a free, appropriate public education. Tying impact aid to compliance would be a first step to ensuring school districts are taking care of our military families. This issue has been going on for far too long, and we need to be proactive, not reactive. Thank you again for inviting us here today. We are here not just for Wesley, Zeke, Josiah, and Marissa, but for all exceptional military children, to prepare them for further education, employment, and independent living. Let's do the right thing and support those who give the most to our country by ensuring their children receive an appropriate education. Thank you for your time today, and we're happy to answer any questions from the audience at this time.
Yes, Congresswoman.
Well, first of all, it's heartbreaking to hear your stories, but we're all really grateful that you're here today and that you're sharing. And appreciate, it's very compelling to hear your stories. You know, we've had our own challenges with our little guy, but it doesn't compare to anything that you all are enduring. So I wanted to hear more about what the Marine Corps is doing, because this is the first that I'm hearing that they're doing that they're doing well, and it sounds like you don't have any cases that are Marine families. So I'd like to hear what insights you can give us as far as what the history is, what they're doing, and it seems like that's the model if it's working as well as it seems to be. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay. So there's an interesting backstory to the Marine Corps. About a decade ago, there was a senior general who had a severely disabled child. And during that time, they decided to really take a look at their EFMP program and take a holistic view. They surveyed their families. They found out that they really just needed to beef up their EFMP coordinators. And because of the problems they were seeing on the legal side, they figured out a way to, I guess, use appropriated funds and be able to funnel it to a different program so that they were able to somehow pay for those special education attorneys. So I know that they do a very good job about surveying their families every 3 years. I've seen one of those surveys recently, and I think they just have a good pulse of what their families are doing. So I think they just made a conscientious effort and to support the EFMP program. I do know that maybe perhaps before 2007 there was a stigma within the Marine Corps that if you have an EFMP family member that your career would not go anywhere. Mm-hmm. And so I think they wanted to kind of nip that in the bud and be able to have those support services in place. So I know that the Navy is taking an active stance right now, and they're looking into the same model, if not beefing it up and making it a little bit better. And so we're hoping that all the other services will fall in line, because I think it's critical that we actually support these military families. There's a lot of talent and a lot of great, service members out there that can do so much for our country. And if we can take care of this, it will definitely improve our military readiness and retention. I hope that answers your question.
And one thing I would add, it seems like there's a lot of lack of incentive for school districts to follow through with what ESSA, IDEA, Title II of the ADA, it's a lot of federal law that applies in these situations. If there's a way to really partner with military and the public school to create some type of incentive. Unfortunately, the necessity for lawyers, and there's always a joke, lawyers ruin everything, right? But the necessity for lawyers is a real thing, because many school districts will kind of hold off on doing, quote unquote, the right thing to see if the parent will lawyer up. And time and again, I even have clients of mine who are special education teachers and school administrators. I have principals and assistant principals, and I represent their children in their own school districts because they said things like, once we saw you get involved, everyone's demeanor changed, everyone's position seemed to shift, and things got done. It shouldn't have to take that, but the reality of the state that we're living in right now, hiring attorneys is something that a lot of us parents will just have to do.
So if I could address that as well. I'm Marie Balaki. I'm the Director for Marine and Family Programs out of DC, and EFMP is one of the programs that falls in my portfolio. Yes, we do have lawyers, but it's more than that. We have our EFMP folks look at every assignment, and we go through the assignment process with the assignment personnel, and we check the incoming, so where you're PCSing from, where you're PCSing going to, and make sure that those medical, because we don't have medicine, we rely on the Navy for our medical support, make sure that those medical requirements can be met on the gaining installation, so that it's a total process that we look at when we PCS, and we handle every single case, so everyone is touched by our EFMP. And then because we are an integrated system, our school liaison officers right down the hall from our EFMP folks, the orders people are right downstairs. So we are all hand in glove. We work the entire process. And we are working closely right now with the Navy, talking about how they can get there and what can we do better. We did do a RAND study that showed that those people with EFMP children who are in the program they are promoted actually maybe a little bit faster than their peers, but there is no, and they stay in the service longer, and we believe that is that support system. They know that they can get the support system from within the Marine Corps. So we do, it is one program we do well, so thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you for what you're doing.
And let me say, I don't want it to seem like we're against school liaison officers, not at all. Actually, a lot of my clients come to me, this is their 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 10th duty station, and they tell me with a previous school district, the school liaison officer came with us to all the IEP meetings. They were very vocal. They actually served as special education advocates on our behalf. But the school district that we're in now, it's radio silence. And so it's the consistency from base to base. And I think that's for everyone, including the non-disabled students who are PCSing and going to different schools, as well as children with disabilities. They need more consistency and more efforts towards consistency.
Any final questions? The same way that the lower enlisted can't afford the attorneys to fight this, there are a lot of civilian families that are in the same boat. Is there any way to partner with them? Is there anything we can do, or how would we even go about forcing the school districts to do what they're required to do by law? Because this is a far larger problem than just Department of Defense. And now we're going to take Department of Defense dollars that are there to train your spouses to go fight and do great things for the country, and we're going to take some of that money to force an organization to do something that they're already required to do by law. How is there any way to maybe partner with somebody else to make this happen so that the benefit goes beyond just us, it goes back to the civilian community that also can't afford to pay for those attorneys?
Well, the idea is that federal funds follow implementation of these laws. So school districts that are, I don't know what else to call them other than repeat offenders, the, I guess, anvil hanging over their head is the loss of federal funding. But that very rarely happens. That very rarely happens. There have been cases where accreditation has been taken away from school districts, but frankly, the school district I'm thinking of, should I name it? No, I'm not going to, but they're in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Even though they went through this whole thing of losing accreditation and getting in all sorts of trouble in 2015, I still have clients in that school district. So it's, even though we have that mechanism, it seems like the actual implementation of any sort of penalties is not occurring. And earlier during the K-12 panel, it was mentioned that it's not really, it shouldn't be the military's responsibility to fix the public schools. It really shouldn't. I mean, the public schools, that's the Department of Education, they've got their own, other than partnering with them and trying to come up with creative solutions, and also perhaps even just the communication and the understanding that we are not gonna pass a blind eye to any violations that you do on behalf of the military student, but also that would carry over, I would hope, to the civilian children as well. I think that could go towards solving this accountability issue, because that's really what it is. And that's why I have a job. And it's one of those things that I would love to be out of a job. I know that's crazy to say, but I would love to be out of a job, but it doesn't seem like it's going to happen anytime soon. And consistency is also, I mean, I keep saying that, consistency across school districts is a huge issue. Did you want to say something about that, Shannon?
I know in the district that we experienced is they are repeat violators of federal law, and there is no consequence to that, none whatsoever. It's, my son was not educated for a year. And I said, where are his school records? We don't have them. I mean, they will blatantly tell you, they're not even trying to pretend that because there's no penalty. So I think like what you were saying, the issue is you have to first be working with a district that actually wants to educate your child. I mean, I think in my case, they looked at his IEP and said, oh, we are never going to give him all these services. And we kind of realized that going in, which is why we said, hey, let's try to work something out here. Maybe we can get him integrated for the first 6 months. Let's see how things go. That they immediately in 30 days were like, we are not doing this. It just, you know, and I called the California Department of Education. So after they filed due process and we got the hearing hearing notice. That was we don't do that. We only step in when there's actual litigation involved. But I got the IEP notice, so the attorney says, well, I need the records. I need his records. By law, when I do a request for his school records, they have 5 days to send them to me. It was the last day of school when I got that notice, so of course when I request it, I don't get them in 5 days. I call and they're like, well, it's summertime. It's federal law that I need to get those records. I need to send them to my attorney. And they were just like, we don't have them. I called the Department of Education, California Department of Education, and I said, they're in violation here. And they said, give them some more time. It's the summer. And I just kind of threw my hands up and I was like, we got to get out of here. Like, we have to leave.
Yeah.
I can't do this. My son wasn't educated, for a year. And so it's difficult.
What are we doing with Dodea schools? Not to throw them under the bus, but I can say,
We want you to ask the question to the mic
Okay.
so everyone can hear you.
What are we doing to work with Dodea schools? Because they are also, there are some history there with Dodea schools also not having the resources because of different things. So how are we also supporting families with Dodea schools who have fear of addressing it because they have their own set of laws and regulations? So what are we doing there? I'll give you an example. I had a school counselor bring a 504 to me in the lunchroom where my child was, and I was working for the school to sign my child's 504. And that was appropriate. It's not legal, but I've seen some things and heard worse horror stories with Dodea, things that you're talking about, but it's Dodea. So what do you do there and what's happening?
Well,
I know it's not isolated.
It's not, and it's the same process. They're subject to federal law, just as if they can, into either the neighborhood or community public school or homeschooling. Because then, if you file due process against Dodea, your spouse is the active duty military member, there's a lot of implications there. It's very difficult. Now there are some Dodea schools that are great and some that are not so great. And just as active duty military members, PCS in and out, a lot of times the people who are teachers, I've had friends who are active duty spouses who are teaching at Dodea schools. So again, the consistency issue. I hate to say that there's no answer. But at this point, it really seems like the law requires legal action for you to get any sort of solution. Now, let me say, I do file due process quite a bit, but almost all of my cases end up settling. Because the way that we approach it is, I'm not here to yell at anyone. I recognize that teachers have a very difficult job and a great responsibility. And no one goes into special education because they're trying to ruin a life. And special educators have a passion for kids. They feel called to this type of work. And so we have to recognize that, but sometimes the teachers themselves need more support than they're receiving from their administration. So sometimes even partnering with the teacher in that regard, saying, okay, here is the issue. This is what Josiah needs. This is what Zeke needs. Teacher, you and I, let's talk about how are we going to solve this issue. I settle almost all of my cases. I really do, and to the benefit of both parties. And then we're able to then move on collaboratively because we set that tone. We can talk later again if you want. I don't know if I answered enough.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's give our panelists a Ms. Norman and panelists, thank you all so much for your stories. Truly appreciate that. And again, they will be around to answer additional questions and to